and the semiotic games that coaches play. This is actually one of my favourite lectures because it's all about communication and some of the more subtle forms of communication, if you like. So if we think about our coaching practice and we think back to Vygotsky and his description of the zone of proximal development, you can see that you've got to use an appropriate pedagogical approach in order to enable student potential, enable them to achieve. And so research suggests that within such an approach, the teacher or the coach, yourselves, is a semiotic mediator. So this means someone who uses signs to promote the process of internalization. So someone who uses signs and symbols to promote learning or the processes of internalization of information. So what's a sign, you ask? So signs include things like the words that we use, gestures that our body performs, images, both on paper and on recorded devices, sounds, recording devices I should say, sounds, also objects can be signs. So according to Saussure, he's the founder of modern semiotics, a sign has two parts. So the first part is the signifier, so the form in which the sign takes. So that's what it actually looks like. And the second part is what's signified, so what the sign means, so what the concept represents. And this is a little bit complex, but let's keep going. So there we have the sign and what's signifier and the signified. So what we're trying to say is there the shape of the object and also what is meant by the object. Let's look at a few signs now. So most of you would recognize this as the stop sign. The physical sign is the signifier, so the red shape that you can see on the PowerPoint. And what's communicated by that? The concept of stopping or caution, to stop when you're driving on a road, for example. So the shape is the signifier and stop is the signified. Moving on. So here's another sign. This has got text on it now, and you might see this in a shop front. What does it mean? Obviously it means that the shop is open for business, and the shape of the sign comes from the text on the sign, and what's signified or what's meant by the sign is obviously the action. We're open for business. Obviously sounds are also signs. So the sound of a fire engine, and I'll just set that off again for you. You can probably imagine if you hear that sort of a sound in your car, you're probably first of all concerned that you're over the speed limit, and second, you start to worry about the fire truck getting past you and off on their way. So you can see how a sound has a form, but it also communicates something in particular, doesn't it? And you know that the subtle differences between the sounds of fire engine, the police, and ambulance all communicate different things in a similar sort of way. What else communicates? So the smell of smoke is a really powerful communicator, and if you're in bed and it's dark and you smell smoke, it's going to communicate something very powerfully for you. Obviously we can't include smell in PowerPoint, so you're going to have to use your imagination for that one. In particular for coaches and perhaps teachers, the most important signs we can use are words. We can also use inscriptions, drawings, sketches to communicate to our athletes, and you would have all seen these. Probably more likely to be watching basketball games where the forecourt is laid out on a on a tablet and the coach is describing the next play or something similar. So inscriptions and drawings and sketches are a very powerful form of communication. But obviously, if you remember back to that list, gestures, the signs we make with our bodies are extremely powerful communicating devices. So you can see as we go clockwise around that page, coach top left is obviously pretty happy. Coach middle top, he's certainly instructing that athlete that he wants something to happen, and he doesn't look very happy, does he? Norma Plummer there, top right, seems to be holding a sort of encouraging stance. She wants perhaps some motivation from her athletes. Muffet McGraw, not very happy again, and perhaps the last coach there, bottom left, perhaps disappointed with the play. So all very powerful forms of communication. I'm wondering if you guys have had some experience with coach gestures, and perhaps you've had something similar to this one. Have you ever had the look from perhaps in training or in a game? And what did it mean for you? So Wayne Bennett gives some very famous gestures and facial expressions to communicate to not just his athletes, but people from the media. But certainly a very powerful way to communicate without screaming, pointing, or doing anything too overt. It's important to remember, though, that signs are tools and we use them unconsciously. Obviously, we're now becoming a little bit more aware of them, and we can use them strategically, and we want to use them in ways where we can improve our athlete performance and perhaps our coach communication. But something that's extremely important is that you need to remember that in order to communicate effectively, both yourself and the person you're communicating with needs to understand the sign being used. And that's a great example there of Winston Churchill flipping the bird if he was pointing it at an Australian, but to English troops, that was very much a V for victory sign. So it's important to know your audience before you start to communicate with too many complex signs. So a challenge for you. Just imagine you're coaching on a team. They're high school students, and perhaps this game's being played in front of the school audience and possibly even parents, and it's sort of a situation where you don't want to get too extreme and out there with your communication technique. But so without yelling across the field, how would you communicate each of those following points? So what would you do with your body to communicate hustle, or I want you to think about what you're doing. Come on, go for it. Sort of encouraging gestures. What would they look like? How can you communicate that you're happy with something, and how can you communicate that you're not happy and that you want some sort of a change? I want you to have a little bit of a think about it, and if you're listening to this lecture in the library, perhaps don't start swinging your arms around, but have a think about what you would do and how you would communicate in such a situation. So importantly, and this is something that's become a bit of a theme in people's assessment task submissions, is that coaches communicating didn't always hit the mark. So would you be confident that your message was understood by all of the insiders, so the people in your playing group? And also importantly, do you think that everyone at the match would make the same meaning from your gestures? Because there are important stakeholders that might be there, perhaps the president of your club, the principal of your school, parents of your athletes. They're all going to take a very dim view if they feel that your communication is perhaps negative or inappropriate. So it's always important to make sure that you remember the audience that watches your gestures before you start to overtly communicate in this way. So I suppose in that respect, it's important to remember, and another great theme from people's assessment task is that the coach is the architect of the motivational climate. And all of those hidden messages in sport, the hidden ways that we communicate, cannot be underestimated. So if it's your job to bring about change, if we do this in a forceful way, rather than fostering an adaptive learning environment where the athlete holds personal value in a behavior, then we can disempower the athlete. So if we're controlling and dominating and overbearing, then the athlete can become disempowered. And as I said at the start, if we're the architect of the motivational climate, then we need to think about the way in which we communicate, not just the words that come out of our mouth, but how we hold ourselves in a group, how we get into athletes' faces, and how we use our body in a forceful or communicative way. Okay, we've got a great task for you to do this week, so get into that task as best you can, and I can't wait to see people's submissions for that. There's obviously a great reading online as well, and some very good references that are available from the reference list there. All right, go for it.